Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Corey Chavous, former Vanderbilt defensive back, former NFL defensive back. He is the owner of DraftNasty.com, runs the Draft Nasty Draft Guide as well. We will talk to Corey about Vanderbilt players in the NFL Draft, and not just this one, but some beyond that as well. We thank our sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House. They turn coffee into water and have a mission to bring clean water to the world. Vanderbilt baseball picks up a win over Samford. Commodores 14-3 on the season will head to Texas A&M this weekend. Our news brought to you by Sutherland & Belk, which is a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland & Belk is committed to fighting for those who have been injured in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. Joining me now, a good friend of mine, Corey Chavous. He runs the operation DraftNasty.com, does an outstanding job covering the NFL draft and other drafts too, not just the NFL. Corey, of course, was a former Vanderbilt cornerback, one of the great ones, and played a long time in the NFL. Corey, thank you for joining us. How have you been?
I've been good, man. It's always great to talk to you, Chris. I'm kind of excited about getting a chance to break it down with you again, man.
Yeah, same here. Well, let's start with, before we go into the guys who are going into the draft, three notable guys from Vanderbilt didn't go, and it's not usual that Vanderbilt is in this situation. It had JoeJuan Williams go pro early, but three guys who were draft prospects for sure, Jared Pinkney, Ke'Shawn Vaughn, Kalijah Lipscomb, did not go and are returning for their senior years. Talk about those guys individually. Tell me where you think they might have gone and whether coming back was the right decision for each.
Well, I mean, I think you can start off with Jared Pinkney and kind of talk a little bit about the tight end class that's coming out this year. And I think that'll give you a little bit more projections on maybe where he would have gone because I think he still would have been able to compete pretty favorably in this class, but it is a deep class for tight ends. I mean, obviously you got T.J. Hockenson as one of the top guys, to me, the top tight end in the draft. You have Noah Fant, his teammate, Irv Smith, who's kind of similar in terms of skill set, not as probably as big as Jared is. And then you go on beyond that, there's the depth in the draft because you got a guy like Josh Oliver from San Jose State, I think is going to be kind of a sleeper in this tight end class. And you think about players like Drew Sample out at Washington who can be a hand-in-the-dirt blocker. And so you've got so many different varieties of tight ends and H-backs in the draft that, you know, it really becomes somewhat of a crapshoot in terms of where you would go at the tight end position. I mean, you can go all the way out to San Diego and a guy like Kahale Warring, who I think is an underrated prospect and who we have a third-round grade on. So it was a deep class. I think he would have been in the mix, but I think it was a good decision to go back.
What about Keyshawn Vaughn? He was the one that was really difficult to size up because he played at an electric level late in the year, especially in the Texas Bowl. But he also had the injury concerns. And, of course, there was also the fact that he transferred out of Illinois. And the running back position has been devalued. There's a lot of things that were working against him. But, boy, once you turn on the film and watch him play, he was electric. And I don't care how much that position's been devalued. I think he can obviously play at that level and play very well. What did you make of his decision to come back? Where might he have gone had he come out?
Well, I mean, I think he would have gone a little higher than maybe some people would have expected, just simply because I thought he had outstanding balance along the sidelines. You saw that against Florida. You can see the burst on the outside zones to get to the edge. Was a little bit of a left-hand dominant runner, which could be an issue in terms of ball security when players are thinking more turnover at the next level. But I thought he could catch the ball pretty well. Thought he was pretty good setting up on screens. He was a slasher. So I think that the thing you mentioned earlier, the being hurt on two separate occasions, I believe it was against Tennessee, for example, I think those things kind of would have weighed in to the decision-making process for him, because I'm sure he wants to be able to show he can stay healthy. And I think even the South Carolina game, if I'm not mistaken, I was at that game, he might have left for a brief period. So there were just some of those instances where you like to see a finished game.
So what I'm hearing you say is that was probably the right decision to come back, but give me just a hypothetical. Where do you think he would have gone had he gone in this draft? And what is the range of opportunity in terms of rounds for him next year, Corey?
Well, I mean, I think he could be going into the season. He'll probably have a second round grade from some people, at least a day 2 grade. I think in this draft, the reason why I feel like it would have been a potentially favorable situation, a lot of the backs now you have the information on, I think he would have run pretty well. And I think he kind of is in that mix of between a David Montgomery in Iowa State, a Josh Jacobs, a guy at Alabama. You can also look at Damian Harris from Alabama. Did he remind me of anybody in this draft? Yeah, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Miles Sanders at Penn State, who I think is kind of underrated. So all of those types of backs, he would have been in that mix. And if he can stay in that mix, barring a breakout year from a running back next year, Chris, and in terms of some of the running backs that are coming back a year from now, he's in pretty good shape, because you'd probably say Eno Benjamin maybe out at Arizona State is a guy to look at. And then you've got some other guys that may or may not come out early, or Michael Warren II, who I think he would compare favorably to, Travis Etienne from Clemson. So those are just some of the names. And you always know that there could be some guy that kind of shoot up into the mix. And then obviously you can't forget about Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin, who led the nation with over nearly 2,200 yards as a sophomore.
Pinckney next year, Corey, I'm guessing he's probably a 3rd or 4th round guy with the chance to shoot up higher?
It depends on explosion for me with him, just in terms of not necessarily getting open. I think he finds the soft spots. I think he runs well after the catch. You saw that in the Nevada game. He's done a lot of different things from that wide tight end spot, flexed out. He does a good job on option routes, being able to adjust his body on difficult throws. You saw that against Notre Dame. I think he's a guy who's good on crossing routes, drags, on bootlegs, stuff like that. Saw that against Tennessee. So he needs to probably do a little bit better job as overall in terms of being able to just, again, threaten the defender more initially. So just working on his lower body explosion, just overall, I think that'll make him a better prospect. And that's something that I would be, concentrating on if you're Pinckney.
Kalijah Lipscomb is a kid who's got a chance to, I think, end up in some all-time SEC leader rankings in terms of total yards and things like that. Certainly going to climb the Vanderbilt receiving list next year. He's an interesting one to me because it seemed like he was more of a deep threat as a sophomore. You saw that explosiveness as a freshman on the punt return against NC State. This year, he was more of a move the chains receiver, an underneath guy. Had some struggles with catching the ball at times, but I've seen him in practice at times where he got the best of JoeJuan Williams and really frustrated JoeJuan in practice. I would have to think with the way that receivers are a dime a dozen now, he was going to be maybe 5th, 6th, 7th round pick if he came back. I think he said he was getting higher grades. To me, that was hard to see, but kind of a mixed body of work for him. Most of it's good. Where do you see him having gone had he come out last year? How could he stand to benefit, and where could he go next year?
No, I have to admit that was a pretty good scout report by you to me. But again, I guess maybe we just agree on the player. But, again, I saw what you saw. And I think that for me, with him, if you're looking at, for example, if you're a scout, and again, that's not what we do. We're journalists. But if you're an NFL scout, and I talk to a lot of them, then they're going to say, okay, well, why couldn't we get more of what we saw against Tennessee State? And that goes to your point about what you saw as a sophomore. So again, that's just it's kind of about like how you're used. I don't necessarily think that that's a weakness per se, but it would be good for him next year to come back and show that he can get back to doing more of the down the field stuff. I think he's probably a 4.55 guy. I think he'll run in the 4.5 range, which is a positive, especially for a receiver that can drop his hips like he can. He's also been a player that, during his career, I believe, has enough aggressiveness to be a special teams contributor. You have 4 tackles, I believe, in as a sophomore. Obviously you don't use a guy like him maybe as quite as much on special teams as it goes on, but some guys do it all. So I think even doing some of that stuff like that will help his draft stock because he's a tough player. He's pretty physical. You talked about, sometimes leaving some balls on the ground. Where you saw that too against in the Notre Dame game. That could have been a game-changing play for the program and for him. The 4th and 10 play against Notre Dame through the contact on the ground. It was an excellent effort. Couldn't make the catch. You have to make those catches if you're going to be a high draft pick. It's just that simple. And, that's what, NFL teams are looking for.
I'm going to go to the mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Are you in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance? Are you looking for life or commercial insurance? Call Josh at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton. He is my insurance agent. I hope you'll make him yours as well. VU Matt 23 asked the $1 million question, where will JoeJuan Williams get drafted?
Well, I think he'll go in the second round. Now, after the workout the other day, if you begin to get into all of these workouts and what they actually do or don't do for prospects, it can become a little bit, things can become a little bit skewed in terms of the evaluator's opinion, because I see a lot of people that I've talked to over the years, they'll have one opinion of a player and then a workout drastically changes that. And sometimes, it needs to, I guess, if you're looking for something that maybe you had a concern about that's verified. I think he's a very smooth mover at his size and weight. Very rare to find a guy at that size to move like he can move. And I think that's going to bode much, much more important for him than anything else that you could talk about when you're that tall. Now, I do think that sometimes he'll get into, some of the quickness matchups, and you saw that a little bit in some of the games, and, he'll get a little grabby down the field. You're going to have to just live with that if you want that type of corner. Probably not quite as fast as the kid last year, Trey Flowers, who ended up starting for the Seattle Seahawks at corner, because when Trey came out, he was a 4.4 guy, and that gives him a little bit more comfort in some of the things that they can do with him up in Seattle. Now, he was a safety in college, whereas JoeJuan was a 3-year starter practically at corner, and kind of battled everybody. But I think he's a guy that can start pretty early in his career. He kind of reminded me a little bit of the kid Kevin King, who played at Washington and is playing with the Packers now. Probably a little better player than King was coming out. Not the same type of testing athlete, though. Although close, because the 10-7 broad jump the other day, that was pretty impressive.
He just seems like he's a polarizing player. I don't think anybody questions that he can play at that level per se, but I've heard chatter at various points that some teams maybe saw him as more of a safety because of his lack of top-end speed. On the other hand, he's huge. He's physical. You've seen him get first-round projections, I think, by Todd McShay and some other guys that people respect. He just seems like a guy that you could ask 32 different teams, and he might get 32, well, maybe not 32 different opinions, but certainly a lot of different ones, Corey.
It really comes down to who that plays your style or would draft you as a corner. What do they need? So, I think a team like Atlanta could be in the services for him because, you've seen some movement there. I do think they're going to be in the market to look at a couple more corners in this year's class. I think Robert Alford is no think they released Robert Alford, who's a good player. I don't know if they re-signed him or not as of yet, but teams like that who've had those longer corners, because you look at their coach, Quinn, and he's had some of those longer corners in his background. Seattle, Jacksonville, those types of teams. Who do they need? You don't really need a corner necessarily in Jacksonville like that because you've got a couple. In Seattle, are you satisfied with what you've got on the outside in Griffin and Flowers? So you start looking around. Bradley Roby is no longer in Denver. He signed with somebody else, a 1-year deal. So now you start looking around, okay, well, where can he project? And if you go to a place like Denver, do you match up in that division? I think he does a little bit. Think about it. You got Mike Williams, in Los Angeles, you've got to match up with him. You think about just, the problem is now that Oakland has Antonio Brown, do you match up with that type of receiver? So all these different considerations come into play. A place like Buffalo that, likes longer corners because of McDermott's background with Josh Norman. And that kind of is like another guy who I kind of compare Williams to, Josh Norman. Don't forget, when Josh Norman came out, he was running in the high 4.6s. There's a reason why he ended up going in the 5th round.
Wow, that's great info. I'd forgotten that his time was that bad, Corey.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one thing you have to remember, and I've talked to a lot of defensive backs coaches, and I believe in this. When you're as long as he is, 6'4", you got 32.5-inch arms, you can run a 4.5, which is he's a 4.5 guy. He's probably a high 4.5, low 4.6, which really means he's a 4.4 guy because that one step is all. You can't blink your finger in the difference between 4.4 and 4.5. And that one step, you've got to throw around and through Williams. So you kind of have to look at that if you're evaluating it correctly and look at it from those terms. And that's why he was able to, be a step behind Boykin a couple of times, who ran 4.4, but still he made the play. That's why he was able to be a step behind Brian Edwards a couple of times, and he could rake through the hands. You can see that a lot now against Georgia. Some of those quicker players had their way with him, but even on the big post route he gave up, it was really more of a situation where the other corner didn't roll to the middle of the field. And I thought he showed pretty good speed on that play. I thought he got ran by in the fourth quarter of that game on an incompletion, the Georgia game. But you don't see a lot of that from him on tape. I mean, he's normally in phase with the receivers.
The way you talk about these things, I'd almost think that you do this for a living and maybe played in the league at defensive back.
Well, you know what, man? When you watch defensive backs as long as I have, you can kind of tell which ones are good. And I think he plays the game the right way. I really do. I mean, I just think he plays with emotion. He's a good tackler. He's physical, and he can move. I just like seeing guys move effortlessly. You know what I mean? And I know you were at his pro day, and you can see just how good he moves. Sometimes you just kind of have to remove the stopwatch a little bit. Just kind of watch how a guy moves around. Byron Murphy, a good example out of Washington, 4.55. That's only a tenth of a difference from this kid. His stock hadn't dropped. He's only 5'10", 190. And I think they have similar movement skills, even though Murphy's probably the best mover out of all the corners. Are you going to draft the guy who's the best mover, or are you going to draft the guy with the best time? Now, traditionally, the Hall of Fame kind of guys, Champ Bailey, Charles Woodson, you could go on and on. A lot of those guys have the stellar 40-yard dash times coming out of school, Chris. But there are players, like we mentioned earlier with Josh Norman, Everson Walls, who was a great corner for the Dallas Cowboys in the 80s, ran a 4.7 coming out of Grambling State. Aeneas Williams got faster during his career. I played opposite him, another Hall of Famer, or a Hall of Famer, and he ran 4.5 something coming out, but then he ended up becoming a 4.4 guy through training and track drills during the off season. I don't think that happens a lot, but it can occur. Watching Williams run, I actually think he can still get even faster.
Yeah, he's a very smooth guy. You're right. I noticed when he was doing his shuttle and things like that, he just I don't know, I'm not going to say he glides, but he moves very well. It's fluid. Let me ask you something.
And you know what? And think about it from this perspective. DK Metcalf, another big guy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You look at some of those shuttle times and stuff for JoeJuan Williams and compare him to a guy like Metcalf. You're talking about 7/10 of a difference in some cases, which just shows you the difference in how he transitions. I'm talking about on stuff like the 3-cone drill, the 20-yard short shuttle. I mean, his times were particularly in the 3-cone, I think it was pretty good time for his size. Kind of had a rare 3-cone, but, we'll see what the final numbers are. I think overall those numbers are probably as important as the 40-yard dash for a guy like Williams, the explosion numbers. Because remember, his arms are longer. So if he has a 36-inch vertical, that's almost like, Boykin, like we talked about from Notre Dame with those long arms, having his 43-inch vertical or whatever it is. Their verticals become 45 and 50-inch verticals because of that arm length and reach. So there's just a lot of different ways to interpret all of these workout results.
Yeah, not to mention you get a running start. So there's that too when you get to jump in the NFL. Exactly. Let me ask you, I know that you said you think he's a second rounder. Could you justify making him your first round pick if you are an NFL GM and it's the right fit for him?
Yeah, I could. There wouldn't be a problem with it at all. He made plays. He was productive. Everybody gets beaten. I remember my final year at Vanderbilt. I got beaten by a walk-on wide receiver, and it was, I think, the only touchdown I gave up that year, and I still don't know how I misplayed the ball. So you're gonna give up some plays, and it just, it's hard to find corners who go a whole season in college and not give up some plays. He didn't give up a lot. You can nitpick and try to find these plays that he gave up, but you watched all the games. He didn't give up a lot of plays. And when he did have some problems, it was because he's a little bit grabby. And there's just going to be some corners that get their hands on guys like that down the field. You're going to have to live through those penalties. If you can, you're going to probably have a good starting corner. He just needs to have the same confidence and approach that he had at Vanderbilt moving forward, as opposed to thinking he's not as fast as everybody else. So I think it's really more about who he believes he is. And I think that's something that only teams can sit down and talk with him and figure out.
TB Graham wants to know what you see with Corey Blasingame and what position you see him at.
Well, I think he can play fullback, and I think that's a possibility. I think he can also play on all your special teams, those are positions. I know for me, I played probably in upwards of 15 to 17 different positions at the NFL level based on all the different positions I played on special teams. There are multiple positions on special teams he could play. He could be the kickoff returner. He could be a center on the kickoff return, a guard on kickoff return. He could be a hold-up guy against any of your interior guards on the punt return unit. He can also be a tackle on the punt team. He could be a personal protector, a wing. So when you start talking positions, that's how teams evaluate these players, what they can bring to the table. Now, he had 13 tackles as a freshman. So you know that he can give you a lot in terms of that. I think he's a little bit high running in between the tackles, but he does get it done in short yardage. And you saw that against Tennessee. So you know that this kid has a lot. 10 touchdowns, I believe it was, in 16. He's a pretty good football player. With the explosive workout he had, a lot of special teams coaches are trying to kind of start ciphering through his video and seeing, what kind of special teams cover guy he can be.
Yeah, you hit where I was going next. I think he had 103 special teams plays last year, according to Pro Football Focus. He started out as a linebacker, as you mentioned, so he's trained in the art of tackling, obviously. He's played tailback, he's played fullback, and then again, throwing special teams. I would have to think that the NFL's last few roster spots often come down to special teams play. You add in the fact that his combine numbers, or his workout numbers rather, were really good on Tuesday in terms of jumping and things like that. I have to think he's a guy that's got a shot to earn a late round, or not a late round, but a free agent spot on a roster just because his versatility and because he did show a good bit of athleticism yesterday.
Yeah, he also caught the ball this year. When you think about the fact that, you wonder, okay, can this guy do anything on third down? He's pretty good in blitz pickup and pass protection. And then, and when you add in the fact that he was able to go out and catch 25 passes and average 12.8 yards a catch, you're looking at a different kind of guy. I mean, when you really undress his portfolio, you're talking about a guy with over 700 yards this year, combined total yards, with 6 touchdowns. And then you add on the fact that he could probably play the special teams from earlier, and his value shoots up. So he's a sleeper prospect that I think kind of woke some people up the other day, as you mentioned.
Couple other guys I wanted to talk about. First is Bruno Reagan. I think opinions on him are very mixed. He did not get invited to the combine, which I was a little surprised about. I think the arm length is a question. Some people have questions about the height. I was told he measured, I think, somewhere between 6'3" and a quarter and 6'3" and a half at Vanderbilt yesterday, which I think will help. I think he told me he weighs 322 right now. I think a lot of teams like him at center. Some teams like him at guard. How do you size him up, Corey?
Well, I like him better at center. Did you get an arm length on him yesterday? I think that was something that I thought was a little bit of an issue.
I think 32.
That's excellent. I mean, I think now you're talking about if you got 32-inch arms, and then with his body of work, because again, we're talking about a guy with 40 straight starts in the SEC. We've seen what Spencer Pulley's done. We've talked about Will Holden. So we've got a little bit of a track record here, Wesley Johnson. We got a little bit of a track record here with Vanderbilt offensive linemen. And, these guys have been significant contributors now. So when you start getting in that 40 start range, you catch my eye. Now, in terms of, what he does well, I think he reaches most of his assignments. He's a leverage player. I think he does a good job of if he's uncovered of of chipping and to help his fellow offensive linemen. I think he wins with his quick sets and his pass pro. You can go back to earlier film in his career at right guard, and you can see him doing some of that against higher level competition, like we talked about last night with NC State. He can get as a guard or a center. He can get low underneath the belt buckle of a defensive lineman. And then in these instances, he can be able to turn those guys with just pure leverage. And that wrestling background that you originally mentioned to me when we were talking about the kid, it shows up on tape. And then when you really want to break him down, and for me, this is what I did when I'm studying the guy. I said, well, let me see what he does in space. We'll turn on the Florida game. You got Voshon Joseph out in space. He gets out, open field block. The reason why you have the 75-yard touchdown, probably that block he has against Joseph. So, what about the South Carolina game? Ball gets knocked out of Shermer's hands. The guy picks it up, is about to score. Who do you think went and ran and tackled him? Now, obviously, I'm diving in deep 1 a.m. in the morning to find those types of things, but, it was him. And that shows a little bit about what he can do. But I think guys with lateral quickness, so that against Florida a little bit can get over top of him. Allen Williams made him lean a little bit at the waist and against South Carolina. I think he stands up on occasion when coming out of his three-point stance. Now, that's more at guard than center. And I think sometimes, footwork and trash can be an issue. But, I ended up having our final grade on him was a 6th-round grade. So we'll see what happens.
Well, and he almost never missed time either over the course of his 3 years as a starter.
40 starts. 40 starts, yeah. I mean, entire year 16, 17, 18. So, again, and actually, he could end up getting a 5th-round grade off of the numbers you gave me with the size, which was really what brought his grade down a little bit for me. Had that below average, but with the size numbers that you get, sometimes you have to get those final numbers to finish your grade, and you can move a guy up. That's mainly the only thing that moves up with us is if we get a better size measurement on you. Because I think he plays a little bit bigger even than his size would suggest at times. He's a very burly, he has like kind of a fire hydrant build. I'm saying it's tough to move him.
Corey, speaking of Vanderbilt centers, if I told you 3 years ago that at this time in 2019, Spencer Pulley was going to be signing, a 3-year, $10 million deal, would you have believed me?
Yeah, and looking at his scouting report, Chris, from back when he came out in 2016, did a good job at the guard position of sinking his hips well at the point of attack. He was capable, like we just talked about with Reagan, in terms of hitting moving targets on the perimeter, on some of the wide receiver screens. I thought in that Wildcat package back in 13, he did a good job of pulling. You could see him get up to second-level linebackers and latch. I did think there were some questions about his power and maybe functional playing strength, but because he had been walked back into the lap of the quarterback, and you saw that against Tennessee in 14. But when you go and look at his workout, he was, 9 and 7/8 inch hands, 28 reps at 225, ran a 5.1, had a 28-inch vertical, a 9-foot 4-inch broad, and a 4.4 short shuttle. Those are remarkable numbers. You know what I'm saying? 7.3, 9.3 cone. His workout was absolutely spectacular. We ended up having a 4th-round grade on him. I don't know, and I thought that, he's a player who could snap off the ball and to get into position, even though his pad level would rise the longer the down went on in terms of sustain. But I thought he sunk his hips, effectively at the point of attack and pass protection. Relatively fluid player. If he was going to remain at center, we thought he just needed to improve the snap and step quickness. But we thought he had a chance to earn a swing backup job in an NFL training camp.
Well, if you gave him a 4th-round grade, you were ahead of the field on that one because that's what he played like and then some.
Yeah, and again, those grades aren't really representative of where we think the player is going to get drafted. It's just based on where his grade actually is, and I think we've talked about that before. There's some times where you if you're in the 7th round and you're taking a guy with a 7th-round grade, then you need to get fired. There's no reason why you should be in the 7th round taking a guy with the 7th-round grade. Those are normally guys that are, just could possibly get into a camp, the 6th and 7th-round grades. Because you can't tell me in college football every year that, okay, like this guy has a 7th-round grade, this guy has a 6th-round grade, what have you, and that's where they're exactly going to go. Now, obviously, teams probably slotted like that and adjusted prior to the draft, but for us, 4th-round value doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go in the 4th round. It could mean you're an undrafted free agent because that's just how many good players there are, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about Justin Skule? Was great in pass protection. I know the coaches at Vanderbilt thought he was a better pass blocker than a run blocker. It seemed to me like he was a very underrated player. What's your take on him?
Well, the movement skills are in place. I don't know if you had any numbers on him. I was kind of interested to see what he would run and how, I know how long he is and I already have his size. I just wanted to see because I thought he would move well.
Yeah, I was told he ran about a 5.05 in the 40s, somewhere around there. I don't know that that's
yeah. Well, I mean
sure,
that alone is going to really do him favors because now obviously he was a shot put and track and discus guy in high school at Centerville in Virginia, but he didn't do any running or anything. But I mean, you're talking about another 40-game starter, and he's got good length, 80-inch wingspan. I thought that there's some issues when it comes to speed to power rushes, but he does a really good job of sliding, and I think he's a pretty good bender to be 6'7". And then you're talking about 5 flat. We actually compared him to Will Holden. They're nearly identical in height and weight. I think he's quicker and more athletic than Holden was, and Holden's actually started 5 games in the NFL. So, it's a guy right here that I think has a really good chance to make an NFL team.
LaDarius Wiley, boy, it seems like there's just a lot of guys that are hard to peg in this class for Vanderbilt. But Wiley is a kid who was, from what I was reading, getting draftable grades coming into the year, had a great junior year, according to Pro Football Focus. This year got hurt early, and then he lost his dad late in the year. Did not play very well early in the season. Those things could explain it. I think played better at the end. I know that he talked to the 49ers yesterday, it was reported. What do you see on LaDarius Wiley? Does he get drafted? Can he make a roster? Give us your rundown on him.
Not sure he can get drafted now. I mean, he may on day 3. We were pretty excited about some of the things that we've seen when you do a totality analysis of a guy, because we don't do our reports, and you know this because we work together. We do our reports over the career. So we might be watching film on you from 16, and that helps because then we don't miss something that, we're not going to watch the entire year or anything, but we're going to watch a little bit of film on you from each year as you go along is how we compile our scouting reports. And so when you see that, you can see some things like he can show out of the middle of the field. Tennessee 17, getting out of the middle of the field. There's a deep middle 1/3 post defender on a double move in the slot. So you can see some of those different types of things. You can see him play a little bit of nickel, play a little bit of corner at other points of his career. 4-7 fumbles in school. Very active player. I think he feels consistently. I thought he did an inconsistent job this year tackling. Too many dive tackle attempts in the alley of the defense. Had some poor inside-out angles from the middle of the field. And he's allowed some of those guys to cross his face. You saw that against Georgia. You saw a poor angle against Tennessee, both of those in touchdowns. I thought he had a chance to, finish an interception opportunity against South Carolina. But there's a lot more good than bad. One-on-one tackles against Florida in the first quarter. Made a key 3rd and goal line stop in that game. You could square up and wrap tackle in the open field. Go back to Ole Miss in 2016, another example. Throws his body around. I thought he did a pretty good job of getting Notre Dame's Brandon Wimbush on the ground one-on-one, but then he came back and had another dive missed tackle. So he was more inconsistent in that phase. But 255 career tackles, 7 forced fumbles, a guy who's pretty active. I think he's got a shot.
There's several other guys who had quality careers. I don't think any of the guys are draftable prospects, but you got Jordan Griffin, Charles Wright, Josh Smith, Dario Dingbo. Any of those kids maybe have a shot to crack a roster somewhere?
Yeah, I think for Smith it's going to be about being able to hold the edge. I think that was probably just at his size. I think he showed a little bit more this year as a pass rusher. That was something that, he did a pretty good job of holding edge and fought off a block to force a fumble. I think in the second quarter of the Florida game, Adeyingbo is a guy who's played running back obviously in high school and ran for over 5,000 yards at the prep level. I thought he had a much better junior year as a pass rusher, a little bit of a tweener. I think he's has 4 technique characteristics, but is he long enough to play? Probably longer than his height and weight would suggest, but is he long enough to handle those responsibilities at a 4 technique? He may be. I think he's a really good run defender. I like, some of the athleticism from those high school days showing up on a zone blitz drop interception against South Carolina. But, you've seen some good stuff from him in the past. Griffin is a player who I think really excels running sideline to sideline. I thought bigger offensive linemen bullied him around a little bit on the second level. Hadn't always protected his legs on outside runs. And, just going against uncovered offensive linemen was an issue, but, he will present some snap on occasion against pulling guards. He reacts well to speed options, outside runs, stuff like that. You saw that against Florida. I just think he does a good job laterally running some stuff down, and he's not bad at man coverage. He'll work around some potential rubs and man coverage in the red area. You saw that in the first quarter of the Notre Dame game. I think he's got a shot to get into camp. Getting back to Smith, the U.S. Army All-American, I think that the Nevada game was positive for him. Some of the Florida game was positive. Thought he left some sacks on the field against Notre Dame. And I think his foot speed varies in pursuit at times. Charles Wright, I think he was probably a lot more active with his outside end tenacity. A game like Tennessee in 17 kind of shows that. He will use the outside club and swipe move to turn the corner versus tackles. Saw that against Dennis Daly from USC in 2018. For me, with him, you just got to question, if you're a team, what happened. And obviously only played in 6 games, but in those 6 games, before, going out or whatever, he wasn't as productive as he had been the year before. So a little bit of questions about that. And that's kind of my summary on those guys.
Corey, we talked earlier about the juniors coming back, Pinckney, Vaughn, Lipscomb. I know you've always got your eyes on future drafts. Besides those kids, anybody that you're particularly watching, whether it be the 2020 draft, 2021, heck, 2022 for that matter, are there any other underclassmen that you really are going to be keeping an eye on in the next couple of years on that roster?
Yeah, I want to see how C.J. Bollard develops. I don't know if I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name, but I think he's kind of shown me a little bit. The Abdul Rahman kid is another guy that I think is a guy that I want to look at. They've got a couple of obviously you've already talked a little bit about some of the players on offense that are coming back. I think Dimitri Moore is a guy who's very exciting. Went to a really good high school program, and he's a guy that I think can develop into a pretty good football player. Same thing goes true for the Tay Daly kid. I think he's somebody that, he flashed a little bit this year at times. He's going to have to do a little bit more in terms of coverage. I think the same thing holds true. Some of these guys are going to be competing for spots because you could tell it's a very competitive environment at Vanderbilt. That's the one thing that I'm impressed with in terms of just it's competitive week to week to who's going to start at sometimes. So I think those things are, something that I'll kind of look for moving forward, as to how some of these guys hold off the younger players. And if you do that, then you could be a JoeJuan Williams, a star. But sometimes it's tough. So a couple of younger players that overall I think have a pretty good chance to, catch some win maybe behind themselves over the next couple of years. I mean, now offensive line wise, that's one of the things that I need to probably see more of because you got the guys leaving this year who were pretty much integral mainstays along that offensive front.
Corey, fantastic stuff. Thank you so much for your time. I know you do tons of stuff at Draft Nasty. You produce the draft book. You do stuff on TV. Just tell folks where they can find your work and feel free to use the time to promote any of your products or anything that you see fit to speak on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that, Chris. I just think that it'd be cool if you get an opportunity to pick up our book. I mean, it gets out pretty quickly. It's a NFL free agency recap. And it's a little bit even different than when we were working together, Chris, because now we do a paperback book, and it's about 450 pages, somewhere in that range between 350 to 450 pages. And it's really a book. If you're into fantasy football and you want to know about these players all the way back to high school through college, you'll have your whole book on them. Any weaknesses that they may have as you're putting together your rosters. And I mean, and the book takes us again, 3 to 4 years to produce every year. But it has a glossary of terms. So if you don't understand some terms in the back, you can go to that glossary of terms to kind of see what we're talking about in the book. You can see all the different places that the sources come from. So if you want to go check it out, your favorite player is going to have a little mini book on him within the book. And that's the reason why we went to paperback is because we're able to give a little mini book story on each prospect. And last year we had over 750 prospects in the book. So it's been cool. And I think this year is going to be, around the beginning of April, the book will be done and it's going to be pretty good.
He's Corey Chavous with Draft Nasty. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening. We've got more episodes coming later in the week.